So I was standing in a courtyard in Kibera in the middle of a school called the Chiri Children Education Center. I had traveled there because of a grant that I wrote, because my students and the kids at Chiri had done a joint project together based around math teaching. The kids at Chiri were teaching us Swahili, and we were using the math materials that were available in our school but not available for them to teach them math conceptually through video. But through the course of that project, my students learned that lack of school supplies that was not the biggest, most pressing issue facing the children in Kibera. They found out that some of the infrastructure of the pipes was poor, sometimes just duct-taped garden hoses. And my students were determined to help their new friends. And so they collaborated with children in Greece and in Kansas to fundraise for water filters. And while I was there in Kibera, I had the privilege of being able to deliver those water filters. And I set up a 7-school Skype call, the schools that had raised money for the filters and the children who received them so that the kids could meet each other. As you can imagine, it was pretty emotional. Tears all around. For the children you see on the screen in Kibera, they were literally hugging their water filters. For them, it quite possibly could have saved their lives or the lives of their family members. You see, during the 2 weeks that I was in Kibera, there was a cholera outbreak, and 12 children had died from drinking dirty water. But through the screen of that Skype call, I saw my own students, and I saw that they had tears in their eyes as well. They were feeling the intrinsic joy that comes from doing good for others. And for the rest of their lives, I knew that they would continue looking for more ways to do that. I knew at that moment that our primary mission as educators was to prepare our next generation of global problem solvers. Right now, we're leaving our next generation bigger and more problems than any generation before us ever has. Whether it's climate change, whether it's political unrest, by the way, vote today, whether it's inequality around the world, and that takes many different forms, our children are going to have some serious challenges. In my home state of Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, if you call an Uber, it might be a self-driving car. 17% of the world still doesn't have access to electricity that we take for granted. That's going to present problems as our society becomes more globalized. You may have heard that we're preparing children for jobs that don't exist yet. That's nothing new. In the history of education, that's always been true. We've never known what jobs were going to be there in the future. But there is a difference for us. Technology is moving faster than it ever has before. Economists predict that about 50% of jobs in the United States may be obsolete by 2030. Luckily for us as educators, teachers have less than a 1% chance of being automated. No robot could ever handle the amount of data that you handle every day in your classrooms. And more importantly, robots will never be able to love their students the way that we love our students. But something that's often not talked about is the ethical challenges that our children are going to face. Within 10 years, it may be possible to implant a chip into the human brain that gives people all of the knowledge of Wikipedia, which sounds amazing until you realize that chip could be hacked. We may be able to cure cancer and have lifespans of over 200 years, which again sounds wonderful until you realize we're going to have massive overpopulation and wars over scarce resources. Our children need to be prepared for that world. Are we doing it in our education system? Now, my kids always tell me, give me the bad news first, right? So that's the bad news. There's plenty of good news, and there's reason for optimism. I see it in my children's faces every day when I go to school. Our children have access to tools that will allow them to solve problems in unprecedented ways. They have the ability, they have the technology. It's up to us to make sure that they're prepared. So I'm going to give you 3 ways that we can help develop that next generation of global problem solvers. First, and perhaps most importantly, we need to keep education rooted in humanity. Too many of the decisions that we're making in schools right now, whether it's at the classroom level or the education system policy level, are being made based on data that is easy to obtain and cheap to obtain. We need to get to quality data that tells us about the lived experiences of our students. We right now are making decisions, the most important decisions in education, based on whether or not kids had breakfast. That data can't tell me what my students are going through. Only through relationships can we do that. So I want to ask you a question. Johnson & Johnson did a study, this has been widely reported in Forbes magazine and Entrepreneur magazine. What character trait most closely correlates with success in life? I've heard people say grit, adaptability, determination. If you look at how our education system is set up, you might think that it's ability to solve multiple choice math problems. None of those are true. Empathy. Empathy is the character trait that most closely correlates with success. Yet we spend so little amount of time talking about it in our faculty meetings, in our policy discussions. It needs to be at the heart of everything that we do. Often, schools in affluent areas think of service as a way to build this empathy, and it is. Service is a big part of what I do in my classroom. It's a big part of what I believe. But service needs to be a two-way street. Fundraising does not build empathy in itself. There needs to be a relationship there. I mentioned how our service project came to be in Kibera. It was because my kids saw their friends in Kenya as friends. They had met them multiple times. They knew that they were hurting and they wanted to do something for their friends. There has to be relationships in there. And so when you're building a service project, try and empower the group that you're working with. Try and figure out what it is that they have that they can give your students. That's the relationships that make the magic happen. Second, we have tools right now that allow us to connect with anyone in the world in real time. Time zones are no longer issues. We can record video, we can talk live, Skype, Google Hangout, Zoom. There's a new site called Empatico that just came out that's making connections around the world for kids to develop empathy. We have these tools, we have to use them. Too much of our knowledge is within our school walls. It's time to break those walls down and see what else is out there. We're sending our kids into a global society. Our schools need to reflect the realities that are outside our classrooms. I want to play just a short video. Some of you may have heard of Google Pixel Buds that came out recently. They're earbuds that you can put in your ear. If you're speaking French and I'm speaking English, we can have a conversation and they translate in real time. Right, that's awesome, right? But you don't even have to go out to the store and buy Google Pixel Buds. You have this technology in your classroom right now. If you have a PC in your classroom and it's running the latest version of Skype, this is already built into that platform. Go ahead and play.
Where in the world do you wish to travel? ¿A dónde en el mundo te gustaría viajar? A Rusia. To Russia. ¿Tú? And you? Everywhere. Sería increíble algún día verte en México. It would be amazing to see you someday in Mexico. I would really like to visit you sometime. Me gustaría mucho visitarte algún día. A mí también. Me too.
Those experiences should be commonplace. I've been blessed to have a lot of recognition in my career and to be able to speak to amazing groups of teachers like you. But what I do in my classroom is nothing exceptional. I use free tools. My kids are no more exceptional than yours. There's one difference. When I start thinking about a unit that I have to teach or a topic that I'm teaching, I think to myself, who is the most incredible person in the world that is applying this knowledge to make the world better? And how can I get them to talk to my kids? And when I ask, 9 times out of 10, they say yes, because passionate people want to spread their passion. I realized, teaching in a small rural town in Pennsylvania, that I wanted my children to be able to change the world. But it's hard to change the world when you don't know much about it. In order to expose my students, in the last 4 years, we've connected with over 93 different countries, scientists in Antarctica who are studying penguins, and astronauts on the International Space Station. In each one of those experiences, I ask my students, look for the problems that you want to solve. Look for the problems that fit your passions, something that you want to get involved in doing. I want them to feel how powerful they are. This is just a little taste of one of our virtual field trips. In this case, it was to South Africa, a seabird hospital in South Africa. My students were studying about birds, about animal classification in birds.
It's Shani calling you from Cape Town, South Africa. I'm here in home pen. You see, we've got quite a few singers with us. In front of me here is Steve. Hello, Steve. So Steve is one of our ambassador penguins. Busy Halton here come study. She's annoyed because she's not getting attention.
Now, I don't care if your kids are in kindergarten or in high school. Kids love that kind of experience. And it makes it real. It makes the learning real for them. We know that knowledge can't transfer from short-term to long-term memory without us having an emotional connection to the content we're learning. These kinds of experiences build that emotional connection. If we don't put learners in charge of the learning, they will never take ownership. We need to give our kids autonomy if we want them to change the world. Too much of what we rely on in schools is extrinsic in nature, whether it's grades, points, GPAs. We're getting kids to jump through hoops, and we're calling it learning. But what we know is that as extrinsic motivation goes up, intrinsic motivation goes down. By using those extrinsic motivators, we are destroying our kids' ability to be intrinsically motivated problem solvers. We are defeating the very thing that is in most of our mission statements. We want our kids to be global citizens, but too often we don't allow them to be citizens of their own classrooms or their own schools. That needs to change. I'm going to share one more story with you before I go. The picture you see here comes from a Skype call. My students were connecting with a school in a rural village in western Kenya up by the Ugandan border. And we played a game of mystery animal Skype. It's basically 20 questions. They picked an animal, we picked an animal, and we took turns going back and forth asking yes or no questions to see who could guess the other's animal first. And it was a nice little activity, and my kids learned, and it was fun. But afterwards, the school director took us on a tour of his town, and he brought us to this bridge. And he explained to my students, half of the kids in our village aren't allowed to go to school. The bridge is too dangerous, and their parents won't let them cross. That impacted my kids. They don't have to think about how they get to school. They step on a school bus that drops them off at the front door. The fact that there are kids that can't get that education because of obstacles like this was totally foreign to them. And afterwards, they came to me and they said some magic words. These words tell me that they are passionate about solving a problem in the world and they understand their power to make the world a better place. They said to me, Mr. Soskil, we should do something about that. I dropped everything in my classroom. And as professionals, it is our job to take what our students are passionate about and fit the curriculum into that. And that's what I did. For the next month in my classroom, we looked at different bridge designs. We looked at scientific concepts on how loads are distributed within bridges. They built models first out of paper and then out of cardboard, using the design process to constantly look at their models and say, can I design it better? Until as a class, they settled on one set of plans. And they shipped those plans over to a bridge builder in Kenya. And they asked him, is this possible? Can we build it? And the bridge builder sent back professional blueprints and said, I can do it for $3,000. Now, $3,000 may not sound like a whole lot of money, but in my economically challenged rural area, that's more than we could raise in a year, and my students knew that. And so they asked me for help in building a website to ask for help from other people outside. And over the course of the year, along with their other fifth grade teachers, they ran bake sales and they had movie nights where they made popcorn and sold bags of popcorn for $1 or $2. And they had raised about $1,200 over the course of the year. But because of the website they built and because of how they shared their passion, we received $2,500 in donations from outside. This is the picture they got after the year. So this is the bridge that my students designed and had built in Mukuyuni, Kenya. All of the children in Mukuyuni can now go to school, which makes me and them and my students very happy. But just as importantly, all of my fifth graders now know how powerful they are. They know how much they matter. They know why they're going to school. That's what learning should be about. That's what school should be about. I truly believe that every problem in the world has a solution locked somewhere inside our students' passions. Our job as teachers is to give them the keys to those locks. Thank you very much.
and gentlemen, Mike Soskil. Thank you for your flexibility with the microphone.